Hello, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to everyone. And thank you very much for joining this Deep Dive Wednesday, our third since this new academic year. So today's deep dive is how we can transform one of the most critical, but one of the most burdensome aspects of our work, lesson observations. One of the most important things I think before we jump into this session is to highlight something I think that is very important. And just to say that TeacherMatic wasn't built by tech companies. It was built by educators for educators, specifically to reduce workload while enhancing the quality of teaching, learning, and assessment, and of course, of professional development. So it's built on pedagogy, not just code. So the AI is natively trained on the frameworks we use every day. For example, like the GROW model or Egan's skilled helper model, Bloom's taxonomy, Rosenshine's and other frameworks. So it speaks teacher. And crucially, it's safe and specific. It doesn't generate fluff and it's GDPR compliant. And none of your data trains the large language models. It uses your specific inputs and aligns them specifically and strictly with your policies. So let's jump in. And I think we need to be a bit critical and honest about the current state of observations. And I say this, by the way, as someone who spent 20 years in the classroom, and also I was an advanced practitioner. So part of my responsibility was actually to carry out lesson observations and coach and mentor staff in improving teaching, learning, and assessment. So the process, in my humble opinion, is broken, right? And I say this, as I said, as someone who was a previous advanced practitioner. So it creates an incredible high workload, right? With observers spending hours on administrative write-ups. I was expected to carry out a lesson observation and within 3 working days, I was supposed to have my report ready. So it generates high stress, not just on the observers, but especially for the teachers. So often putting them on the defensive rather than a mindset of growth. And I think also the feedback is often quite inconsistent, depending on who is observing. And perhaps, most wastefully, all that rich data just sits somewhere untapped and unanalyzed. So why should we be using these generators in TeacherMatic? So when we look at the impact on your organization, it really comes down to these 4 key pillars. First is time efficiency, right? This is the immediate win. So by drastically reducing the time spent writing reports, we are giving hours back, not just, to yourselves, but also to the teachers, because we can spend that time in a coaching and mentoring role. The second is consistent feedback. We all know the frustration of this postcode lottery, where feedback depends entirely on who is observing you. So I think TeacherMatic more or less fixes that because it aligns strictly with your policies. It ensures that feedback is fair, consistent, and high quality across every single department. Third, and I think this is where the real value lies, is coaching and mentoring. Because you, the quality leaders, aren't bogged down in paperwork and you're empowered to prioritize coaching. We move away from just ticking boxes to driving continuous, genuine improvement in teaching practice. And finally, a collaborative culture. And I think this is probably the ultimate goal. We are shifting the entire dynamic from judgment, where teachers feel graded and defensive. I've been there, I know the process, to development. So we foster a supportive environment where observations are seen as a collaborative tool for growth, not just to be passed. So with that being said, I've come up with this observation life cycle based on the generators we have. And I just want to say TeacherMatic isn't just another report writer. It supports the entire observation life cycle. From the moment you prepare to step into the room, through the reporting and analysis, right down to the development, review, and action planning that happens afterward. So we're going to talk through each phase, and then we're going to do a deep dive on the generators themselves to see it in action. Right, just to let you know, in my opinion, something that would have taken me about an hour to write up, it'll probably take now 5 minutes. So the first one is preparation, and we're going to look at the lesson observation prompts. And we've all faced this challenge of observing a subject outside of our subject expertise, our specialism. So imagine, a history teacher observing a bricklaying lesson. You might know the pedagogy really well, but do you know the technical skills? I've had, I used to work in the IT department, and I remember a programmer, teacher, lecturer that was complaining about how the observer has no idea about programming. What does she know about programming? What is she going to tell me? So I think with this particular generator, it kind of solves this issue where you input the topic, like, for example, building a right angle corner, and it generates a checklist for you so you can walk into that room with confidence. So what I thought I'll do is I'll go through the generators using this slide deck, and then we'll see each one in action. The next one, which used to take most of the time, and I wasn't very good at it, to tell you the truth. I used to love observing classrooms. I'd go and see excellent practice, some poor practice, and it would really develop my own skills. But it was the writing process that I found very, very challenging. So this lesson observation feedback generator gets your inputs, whether they're handwritten notes, by the way, you can upload handwritten notes, or just typed documents. I used to go into the classroom with a laptop, and I used to write on a Word document some bullet points, and then I was expected to go and generate this report. And the beauty of this generator is that we can upload those bulleted points that I observed in the classroom, but also, just as importantly, also upload your lesson observation policy and guidance, and it will align what you saw in the classroom with this policy document that your organization uses. So it perfectly aligns with your college standards, and we'll look at that in action. The other one is, now this insight generator can be used for a variety of reasons, right? For all sorts of different things. But if you have a spreadsheet from maybe your learning walks or your lesson observations, you can actually upload that spreadsheet into the insight generator. First, it summarizes everything for you, and then it produces a number of questions that you can ask this data. So basically, you can find out which department is very strong on checking understanding or differentiation, and which department is weak on different aspects. So it turns these anecdotes into strategic insight. So we're going to have a look at that too. And then this one I think is extremely important. So it turns everything into action. This is where we can turn everything into action. And we've got two generators here, one for coaching and one for mentoring. The coaching one uses the GROW model to generate coaching questions that force the teacher to reflect and find their own solutions. For the mentoring one, it uses Egan's skill help model, and basically it ensures that our interventions are targeted and evidence-based rather than generic. And we'll also, of course, see that in action in a few minutes. Then, of course, we've got phase 5, which supports the review process. So instead of generic appraisal meetings asking, how was your year? we generate targeted questions based on the specific strengths and weaknesses observed over time. So, for example, we can upload the observation reports into the appraisal questions, and it will generate questions based on that report. And then finally, for the review and support phase, we've got a generator that is called how to. So, for example, it'd be really useful for yourselves and the teachers, by the way. So if a teacher is struggling with a concept like differentiation, they can get instant pedagogically sound strategies to try immediately. But I think it would be also useful for you as the observers, because if you've observed something in the classroom that you thought differentiation was relatively weak, you can use the how to suggest strategies to relay to the lecturer. We also have other generators, by the way, such as scenarios, but because of limited time, we're only going to be looking at some of these ones there. And then finally, we've got the CPD Action Planner that will allow you to upload your lesson observation report, and it will generate smart targets based on that report, right? So we're going to have a look at these generators in action. So with that being said, let me launch my browser. Here we are, right? I've already opened up these generators, and the first one we said we're going to be looking at is the lesson observation prompts. So the example I gave you before is I put bricklaying in here, and the lesson topic is setting out a right angle corner in a wall. I have no idea. I used to teach IT, so that's not my specialism. I did find, by the way, a policy file on the internet. So I'm using this as an example, and this is what it's produced for me here. Let me zoom in so you can see what it does. So I can walk into that classroom. On my laptop, I'll have this document, which of course I can export as a Word document. And within the classroom, I can put my observer notes in here, right? So this is what is generated. And of course, I can even be more specific to the lesson topic. So if it was a very technical topic, I can go to the refine and I can say, generate prompts specifically related to, and then basically I'll put in the subject here. I'll click on refine, and now the prompts are specifically designed for that topic in particular. So imagine, for example, you can see all of these here. So I can really go in there and understand the subject and relate that to pedagogy here. And of course, if I'm not happy with that, I can always regenerate and refine until I am absolutely happy to walk into that classroom with these lesson observation prompts. So that's the lesson observation prompts. The next one we're going to be looking at is the lesson observation feedback, and that really is a heavy lifter. So you can upload a file containing observation notes, which we're going to do now. You can also upload handwritten notes. So basically, if you took a picture of your handwritten notes, you can upload that too. And or you can enter the strengths and areas of improvement here, right? So the one we're going to do is we're going to upload a file containing observation notes. I will show you what that file looks like. So basically, I would have walked into the lesson, and this is typically what I would have written. A few bullet points with a few headings. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn that into a report, and we're also going to use our procedure, our institutional policy to produce the report too. So with that being said, let's do that. We're going to upload the observation notes. And there it is. It's a good lesson, a relatively good lesson. So we've uploaded that. I'm also going to upload a policy procedure here. So let's see. Yep, that's the one I just got from the internet. right? And there it is. And as easy as that, we click generate. And we will have the option for you to upload your own template also very soon. But I'm going to show you how we can use the refine to refine even this further. So from those few bullet points, and according to the policy, this is what it's produced. It was a relatively good lesson, by the way. There you go. So it's written a number of recommendations and next steps. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this document here, and we're going to use this perhaps to generate some of our action plans. So that's the lesson observation feedback. Something that would have taken me a number of hours to write after a lesson observation. As you can see, it's just generated this in less than a minute. Now, it's really important, of course, to critically evaluate everything that AI produces. There has to be the human in the loop. So we really have to fact check everything, and this is an accurate representation of that lesson. Very, very important. I think you have to do this as a professional, and you have to use AI ethically. So with that being said, the next one we're going to be looking at is the insight generator. I'm going to show you something that I generated just to use this and to show you how it works. So essentially, I've got this spreadsheet here. The teachers observed, the department's observation date, session type, lesson focus, strengths observed, areas for improvement, and if you still do the observer grade or whatever you do now, just write that in there. So once you have this type of file, what you can do now is then you can upload it to our insight generator here. And there it is. So what we're going to do is just click generate here, because I think let's just upload it again. There it is. Generate. And it's going to summarize the file for us first. And it's going to then produce a number of questions that we can now use the refine to. So this is what it summarized. It summarized the file for us. Right, and it's now provided a number of suggested questions you can ask of the data. What I would recommend is that if you like these questions, copy them separately, because they will disappear. So I'm copying all of these separately by highlighting and pressing Control-C. And then I'm going to share with you a wonderful shortcut that we're able to paste these questions separately. So the shortcut I want to show you, and it really does help in so many things, instead of the Control-V, which will only allow us to paste our last item, what we're going to do is use a new shortcut, which is Windows V instead of Control V, Windows V. And that way I can ask any of these questions here. So it allows me all of my items that I've copied. So I'm going to click on this one, ask the question, and then now it will answer that question for me. And then I'm going to paste the other questions. Okay, so clear explanations mentioned multiple times in observations, particularly in construction and other practical sessions, right? Strong differentiation strategies highlighted in health and social care, right? Excellent questions for, seen in here. So as you can see, it's really made sense of that spreadsheet there. Now, if I wanted my second question, I go for my shortcut, which is Windows V. And then I can now click on the second question and ask this question here. And of course, you can ask your own question, by the way. There you go. So that's the insight generator. And you can see how useful that is. It really does make sense of figures for you. Right, so that's the insight generator. Now, the next one we're going to be looking at is coaching prompts based on the GROW model. So you can change this, and you can use this with learners, by the way, or other members of staff, and you can even click on other and put a role there. I've gone with the teacher here. I've selected further education, and for example, I am putting this as a topic, classroom behavior management. Quite common, that. So we're going to click on generate. And let me tell you something, an anecdote. As I said, I used to love going to observe classes, but I found it not just extremely challenging to write that report after it, but also to have a dialogue with the teacher. So, of course, I would have to have a conversation with the teacher and discuss, certain aspects of what I observed and how they can improve. And that was very, very challenging because it's a very, very sensitive and personal, topic, this. So this would have been an absolute game changer for myself because I can have now this professional dialogue based on a proven coaching model. So the goal, I would start the conversation with the teacher by saying, so what would a successful classroom environment look like to you? And then I can start answering these questions, having that dialogue and writing up those responses. If the teacher allowed me, I'd be using perhaps, if the teacher allows me, and just, I would be using this just to let you know what I would be doing. So if I had my laptop and we're having that conversation, I'd go not to dictate, but if you press the dictate button, I can click on transcribe. And essentially, I'll have that professional dialogue here and then just start the recording. So for example, what does a successful classroom environment look like to you? And then they would answer that question and it will all be captured here. Once we finish the conversation, I can save and transcribe. And then now all that transcription is all recorded. So with the speakers, and there you go. And I can change those names, by the way. All right, so it's all captured there. So that's what I would personally be doing. And you do have, of course, other tools on your mobile phones. So that's the coaching prompts. And I would definitely, by the way, be copying these questions and bullet points in that Word document and then just asking the question and then getting the response. So it's all captured. The next one we're going to be looking at is the mentoring one. And if you click on the generator information icon, you will see that it's based on Egan's recognized skilled helper model to provide a series of prompts and questions that a mentor can use when conducting a mentoring CPD session with a colleague. So it explains it in more detail and it goes through these stages here. Right, so what's the topic? I saying creating smart targets for lesson observations. That's something, for example, we observed in the insight generator here. Right, I would have taken that, put it in here, and then we can also put the recent lesson observation as background information. So I can just use the topic. But if I go for upload a file containing the observation notes, right? So let's do that. There it is. That's the one we saved, right? And to tell you the truth, what I'm going to do, it's a mandatory field here. Can you see that? I'm just going to put a full stop in here because I want it to produce mentoring prompts solely based on the document I've uploaded. And because it's a mandatory field, I have to put something. I use this hack in the multiple choice quiz generator, and I want to see what it produces. By the way, this is the first time I'm trying this out. So let's see if that works. Click on generate. Drum roll. It's thinking, and there we go. So excellent, really good questions that I could ask. So what do you a typical question that would have been asked by someone who observed me, by the way. You know, what do you feel went particularly well in your lesson and why? So this is the exploration stage. How do you decide on strategies for grouping learners? Did you feel these? And by the way, this is all from that lesson observation document. What challenges did you encounter during the lesson and how did you address them? Obviously, I won't go on and on. Let's go for the action plan. And then, so you've got the, sorry, challenging, right? And then the action plan here. Absolutely brilliant. It would have been an absolute game changer if I had this whilst I was an advanced practitioner. So let's go for this one here. Those are the appraisal questions, right? So what we can do is we can go and upload the same observation notes here. We'll double click on that file and then just click on generate. And what do we have? We have something similar, but these are appraisal questions. How do you feel your lesson planning and organization have contributed to the success of your sessions this term? How can you describe how you currently use diagnostic data to group learners? Really, really good questions. Really good. All right, so you'll see a reason when to use this, when to use the mentoring one, when to use the coaching one. So the appraisal would be, I think, at the end of a process, but I'm sure you'll know better. So this one is the how-to. You can use this as the observer or the teacher themselves can come in here. What I've said is manage better classroom behavior management, right? So I put this in there. I put the influence, the results, ADHD type students and needs, right? Even understood needs, by the way, right? And I clicked on, let me regenerate again, just to prove my point, even understood needs. So if you have a teacher, a lecturer that is struggling with their classroom behavior management because of, you know, the type of students that they have, maybe they're delivering to a group of needs, then they can come in here and provide their own strategies, or you as the observer can provide these strategies after a coaching or mentoring session with them. So it even provides all the answers for you, by the way. So that's the how to. What else do we have? We have scenarios also. So this is really good because this will provide a number of scenarios and suggestions, and then you can discuss. So if you are delivering to a group of teachers that you've identified as, you know, there's low-level disruption, you've grouped them, what you can do is you can create a number of scenarios here and then discuss this scenario within the group. So what I've said is this: manage low-level disruption from a group of students at the back of the classroom. Typical. You know, I face this issue, right? So my role is a tutor in FE. I'm just going to click on regenerate just to show you how that works. It summarizes this. Imagine you're teaching a lesson and you notice a group of students at the back of the classroom engaging in low-level disruptive behavior. They're chatting quietly, occasionally laughing, typical, by the way, and not fully engaging with the task you've set for the classroom. You need to address this situation effectively to minimize disruption and ensure the lesson continues smoothly. So the question is, what would you do in this situation? And then it gives you possible answers. Right, so I probably wouldn't provide the explanation just yet, right? I would hide the explanations, get the group to explain in their own what they think, and then I would provide the explanations. And it does tell you which sort of strategy you probably should go for. So with this one, let's see what it's saying. So it's saying, however, so it's not going to be this one because obviously there's pros and cons to each of these strategies. This would embarrass the students, probably not a good idea. And it probably is this one here, as you can see. This can be an effective way of dealing with this issue, right? So move closer to the group and use non-verbal cues. Eye contact or standing near them. Absolutely. I'd probably go to the desk and just tap it, by the way. That's what I would have probably done. Or just your presence near them actually would probably calm them down. So this is, I think, a fantastic one. And there are also many others. Then finally, as we're running out of time, is the CPD Action Planner. So it produces these smart targets based on the lesson observation. So I'm just going to clear this. I'm going to upload the one that we produced in the session. There we go. And it's going to generate now smart targets based on that lesson observation report. And there we go. All based on that report. Stretching stronger learners, timely written feedback. And of course, you can always then signpost which generators within TeacherMatic that they can use in order to meet these targets. Right, so we've got obviously a feedback generator. So within your own smart target, you can amend it and say, actually, I'm signposting you to this generator, use the lesson plan and make sure that you put embedding English skills within the learning activity. So you can always signpost them to all our different generators here. Right, there you go. Strengthen that sequencing of learning, right, and managing the late arrivals. There you go. So that really is the ones that I wanted to show you. There are more, of course. And as you can see, we did this all within 25 minutes. And I really do believe this could probably reduce your workload by 80%. And it does, I think, most importantly, it goes from judging to collaborating. I used to be someone who was an observer, but also the observee. And I can tell you, it's not a very nice process. If we can have that culture shift where it's not about judgment, but about collaboration, about coaching, about mentoring, and about improving teaching, learning, and assessment, because that's what counts. It's not about ticking the boxes. So essentially and ultimately, TeacherMatic is about freeing you, the leaders, the observers, to lead. It doesn't replace your professional judgment. It just clears away all of this administrative clutter so you can have the time to use that. So that is ultimately at the core of our mission, right? And there's often a fear that AI removes the human element from education. And we believe it's just the opposite. It really, really is. So it doesn't replace your professional judgment. It just clears away, as I said, this administrative clutter. So you can use that time wisely. And it allows you to focus on the person in front of you rather on the paperwork on your desk. With that being said, as I said, we have over 150 generators. If your role is to support your teachers in improving teaching, learning, and assessment, TeacherMatic is a no-brainer. It's not just for struggling teachers, it's also for seasoned teachers. They really can reduce their workload and potentially improve teaching, learning, and assessment. So do point them as part of this process to all of these different generators where you've identified that there needs to be strengthening in that area. Don't forget, also, we've got a free online self-paced course to get the most out of TeacherMatic, and you can access all of this from teachermatic.com/links. Very, very easy URL. It's a 2.5-hour course full of videos and formative assessments, and it really will build your confidence in improving teaching, learning, and assessment using our generators. So I've tried to relay my 20 years of teaching experience on this course. So do signpost, your teachers, your lecturers to this free professional development. And don't forget, just like you're here today, we've got these deep dive Wednesdays that happen on the first Wednesday of each month, where I tackle a theme. For example, formative assessment, lesson planning, employability skills, effective feedback. So do signpost your lecturers to these free monthly deep dives based on themes. You can access everything once again from teachermatic.com/links. And of course, we welcome your thoughts and queries. So you can use the chat pane. And if you raise your hand, I do have the ability to release your mic if you want to come on the mic. So with that being said, I want to thank you very, very much for joining this session. And I really do hope to see you in the next deep dive in January 2026. So thank you very much.